Welcome to Health Oddity, the show that strips away the jargon and hype surrounding all things health and fitness to help you live a long, strong and energetic life. Lining up at the bar this week, here's Peter Lant, Paul Bassett and James St. Pierre.
Welcome to the Health Oddity podcast. My name's Paul Bassett, and today I'm going to introduce you to the usual people. Last week I wasn't here, so I know you all missed me. Just couldn't make the time zone difference. I was busy. I had a job, but it turns out that maybe Peter and James didn't. No, I'm joking. Anyway, please say hey, Peter.
Hello, how we doing? If you're watching, I haven't got 10 years younger. I've just had my hair cut.
Been a long time coming.
6 months, mate.
Is that why you went down to Devon? Because they have shears.
Yeah. They just took me. They took me in the sheep dip as well, so I had a wash. So in the last 6 months, I've had my haircut and a wash, whether I need it or not.
And hey, James, how you doing?
I'm very good. Very excited for this episode today. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, over the last kind of year of doing this podcast, been really lucky to speak to some of the best people out there in the fitness industry. People that perhaps are underlying what you see in the magazines, and they're really the thought leaders, to use a corporate term, the thought leaders out there who are really pushing the industry forwards. We've got, not only are they conveying the information in ways that is easy to understand, they're also developing systems and approaches that are really quite cutting edge and really fascinating, and really have not just crossover for the athlete, but for everyone else. So this week, really happy to invite Steve Maxwell onto the podcast. Thanks for coming on, Steve.
Hey, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you very much. I'm quite honored.
Oh, great. Thank you. Well, thank you. I mean, just to give some background on Steve is, to use that word thought leader again, Steve's name crops up wherever you're starting to look into serious fitness information. And not only has Steve probably tried it, he may have originated it. He has got a background that's varied from wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. He's extremely, extremely well respected within that scene. I say scene, it makes it sound like a music scene, but that discipline. Also, early adopter of the kettlebell when it started to make waves back in 20 odd years ago in the States. In the UK, kettlebells came over a little bit later. Obviously, they were back in the 19th century, but there was just a long time where no one was using the kettlebell. And Steve was one of the people who started to spread the word around that tool. But more importantly, and one of the reasons we want him on this podcast is Steve has an unbelievable level of fitness, and he's maintained that for many, many, many years. And he's not only taught people how to excel at their sport or in just their wellness, he's taught them how to do it safely and to listen to their body, because every 10 years your body goes through some kind of change. I know that's putting a kind of strict mark around it, but what we do notice is that every 10 years we have to deal with a different set of responsibilities and things like that, and the training sometimes has to adjust. And if you're intelligent about it, you can have the exceptional level of strength and fitness that Steve currently has. But also Steve is interesting because Steve, you don't have a fixed abode. And so you've really adapted the way you train, because you don't live in one particular place. I know in the pandemic that may have changed, but certainly when I came to know about you, you were traveling the world. And so you're extremely efficient with the way you train, which is also a really interesting thing. So if you don't mind, could you kind of give our listeners a little bit of a background of what makes you tick and why you were in the fitness industry, if you even call it that?
Well, I started back in 1972 as an undergrad, health and physical education major. And I worked at the first Nautilus gym in Pennsylvania. Nautilus was huge back then, high intensity training. Arthur Jones, a lot of people have never heard that name. He was a real, he created a whole movement of high intensity training back in that era. And then teaching school and eventually working at many different fitness centers. Eventually ended up owning my own place called Mattress Size. I opened up in 1990. And that was the first of many. It was the first super slow guild certified training facility. Later, I got more away from that type of training, got into the kettlebell. First Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy in the Eastern United States, well before Renzo Gracie or Mike Donaher or, Marcelo Garcia or any of these guys. There was Steve Maxwell. And after that era, divorce, I took to the road. I actually moved in a camper van and lived for 3 years. It's something I always wanted to do. I was always a minimalist by nature. And from there, I realized that knowledge is marketable and there's a real thirst for knowledge. People wanted to know what was in my head. And I realized that I could go out and teach seminars and workshops. So I started going traveling. That was another thing I always wanted to do. And for almost 15 years, I lived as a digital nomad, pretty much traveling from country to country, not staying in any one place more than just a few weeks at a time, 15 years. And then some people may laugh at this. I've taken grief for it before, but I used an astrologer for years. This guy's very good. And if you want to check out starcenter.com, if you want to check this guy out, and uncannily accurate. He told me about this pandemic a year before. Said, hey, look, in 2020, you're going to want to get off the road, go back to the US, it'd be the best place for you, and just find a place to hole up. So I listened, and I did. And I bought a tiny house, and I set it up in Washington State. I'm out on the Olympic Peninsula, pretty far from everything, really. Surrounded by the Olympic National Park and the mountains, and quite beautiful out here. And I started doing more and more online stuff. And boy, am I glad I did it, with the shutdowns. And I mean, travel would have been horrible. I mean, could you imagine being trapped in a hotel in some foreign country, not able to travel? I mean, I read about some poor British couple that this happened to, and they just went through their life savings staying at this hotel. Maybe you read about the same article, but a lot of people ended up getting trapped. So thank goodness for this guy who I listened to over the years. And I started doing more and more online, developing. I never had heard of Zoom or any of this stuff, I'm very non-technical. I'm not savvy at all. But here I am, getting close to 70 years old and making a living online with Zoom and online personal training. So it went from in the gym every day to traveling and teaching to pretty much in one spot working online. That's sort of the progression of the last 20 years.
Is it a big shock to go from that nomadic lifestyle to suddenly being rooted to one place?
No, actually, it was surprisingly pretty easy. I really like my little tiny house. I feel, very cozy, very comfortable. I have everything I need. And I kind of travel now through the internet and so forth. And I pretty much do all my work on an iPad. And the online personal training has been very good for me. And I kind of get a chance to meet people all over the world still, almost like traveling, but now I travel through the internet. For example, I trained a girl in her living room yesterday from Portugal. And the day before, I trained a guy from Mumbai, India. And like a week ago, I trained a guy in Saudi Arabia. So I mean, the world is a very small place. So the online has worked out well for me.
Are there any plans to get back to traveling? Obviously, whenever all this is over, whenever that is, next year or so, are there any plans to get back out there, or are you?
Well, right now it doesn't look like the lockdowns are going to be ending anytime soon, and so we'll see. I can't say there's no plans, but for sure, there's a couple places I'd like to go to. I'd like to get back to Icaria, Greece. I think I'd like to go to Lisbos, Portugal, where this woman lives. that I trained yesterday. I've never been to Portugal. There's one of the few places, and apparently it's just absolutely gorgeous there. And I love the ocean. I'm very close to the sea here, but it's it's very chilly and cold here in the Olympic Peninsula. It's similar to similar climate to Ireland or Scotland. It's nothing kind of go for a day on the beach.
Yeah.
I mean, you could, but.
So are you up near? Are you up near Seattle? Are you, Steve? Am I in the right kind of area? Are you?
Yeah, just a little higher, but over west, right on the Puget Sound, and then Canada is just above us. We're here, and Vancouver Island's here, and then Vancouver, British Columbia, in Canada. So we're right on that. About the same. What is it? The same latitude. Yeah, same latitude as Scotland, Ireland. A little below Iceland, a little above Scotland, Ireland.
Yeah, I spent some time on Vancouver Island. It's beautiful up there, isn't it? And
absolutely gorgeous.
Swim, but yeah, it's cold. Yeah,
Victoria is just a beautiful, beautiful little city.
Yeah.
So we're not too far from there.
Would you say though that the years of traveling, in a way, set you up very well to be able to train people during this pandemic? Because people didn't have access to gyms, people didn't have access to all these things, and you maintained your physique and made progress constantly, training in hotel rooms. I've got you've got an ebook which is about isometrics, and you take people through a series of different exercises that are quite well suited to a hotel room, because that's, I think, where you were when you perhaps were videoing.
It was actually in Croatia.
There we go. So you
was
pretty much suited to this
on the coast. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I've been a minimalist by nature pretty much my whole life. There was a time span where I became a householder and had 2 kids and a gym and a jiu-jitsu school where I wasn't a minimalist. But prior to that, I used to have a rule. If I can't fit it into my car and move in 20 minutes, I have too much stuff. Literally, that was a principle I lived by. And then, got married and, did the whole family thing. But afterwards, like I said, I moved into a camper van, and I lived very happily in a Mercedes van, that had been all tricked out and outfitted. So I'd already knew how to scale things down. But being on the road, I literally lived out of one bag. I just put all that knowledge to work, all that minimalist knowledge that I had acquired over the years. And I learned that less can be more sometimes. And it's not so much the equipment, it's the principles behind. It's the principles of the exercise, not the actual equipment itself.
So
most of the things that I teach and espouse could be used with barbells, could be used with body weight, dumbbells, machines, doesn't matter. It's the principle.
So how did you go about it? Because we've had Dan John on a few times, and he talks about deprivation leads to innovation, I think he says. So, and especially with gyms being shut, I know I put some stuff out and somebody commented on it and said, gyms are shut, mate, come back and motivate me when they open up. And I was like, who knows? I mean, they're open now, but like back then it was like, who knows when that's going to be? You can't wait until they open up to carry on doing what you're doing. So I was doing stuff at home. These guys were doing stuff at home. So how did you, what kind of new stuff did you think of? Like using the principles of strength and mobility and movement and stability and all of that. What kind of, how did it evolve over that time, over that 15 years, say?
Well, it's really funny because there were different times in my life where I, for example, I owned a very, very nice gym in Center City, Philadelphia. And it had all sorts of equipment. It had Nautilus, it had hammer strength, dumbbells, barbells, everything you can imagine, kettlebells, club bells, very well equipped. But I found myself so busy working people out that I'd be exhausted. I just wanted to go home. And then I go home and I think, damn, I wish I would have worked out. So, I used to work myself out of my living room or my backyard. And, all you need is a horizontal bar. And a lot of times, just because I had to just kind of recruit my own energy, and my day used to start around 5:30, and I usually get done early in the afternoon. And then I greet the kids when they came home from school. I just work out of my own living room right at home. So I've been, even though I had the gym, I've been doing this for a long time and just enjoy the privacy. To tell the God's honest truth, I don't like gyms. I really don't. They're loud, they're noisy. I hate the music. It's not conducive to training. People just doing all sorts of silly stuff, attention whores, look at me, the girl taking selfies of her ass while she's on the step mill and just goofy stuff like that. Yeah. So I just found it very tranquil and able to concentrate a lot better at home. And so, I had very minimalist equipment at home, a few kettlebells. I built a pull-up bar, and you don't need much. And it's not the equipment. It's not the equipment.
It's funny what you say about that, because I'm like that as well. I do stuff outside. I train guys outside in a local park using kettlebells, maces, pull-up bars, stuff like that. And I was like that in a gym, and there's just distraction everywhere. And if you're under a heavy weight, the last thing you want to be is distracted halfway through a rep or a set, because lots can go wrong.
Sometimes a lot doesn't happen. People just sit there on their phones.
Yeah, but that's one of the things. I think it's kind of, the people, because I've had people come to me and they're like, can you just give me a routine to do just so I don't have to think and I can get on with it? And I'm like, no, if you focus and actually think about what you're doing and think about a program, I was speaking about this the other day, then you get the result that you want. And it can only take half an hour a day as long as you've got half an hour's focus, So
it doesn't take if you're training properly. Exactly. And that's one of the myths of exercise, that you need to train hours. A lot of people won't even start because they believe that if they don't, if they can't give it like an hour or two a day, then they might as well not even try. But in truth, modern exercise science has shown that even as little as one strength workout a week can be very productive.
Yeah.
There was a fellow by the name of Dr. Doug McGuff that wrote Body by Science. And he has what he calls the Big Five. And they produce stellar results in people with just one simple workout a week of 5 exercises. Now, no one's saying that's ideal. But what they are saying is, hey, it's still very productive. And there's no one on the planet that can say they don't have time for at least one workout a week.
Well, if they do, they can't manage their time.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, my programs is a minimum twice a week that people work with us, just because then we've got that touch base and we try and make that non-negotiable. But I have people turn to me and say, well, that's not value for money. And you're like, well, if I tell you I can get you the same result for 20 workouts a month versus 8 workouts a month, which is better value? The one that's going to take you less time. I could make it harder for you.
and it's been proven. It has been decisively proven. There's no real difference between working out 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 5 times a week. Results are not commensurate with the amount of time spent. What results are commensurate with is the intensity of effort, how hard you work. So if you have someone that really trains really, really hard, even once a week, they would get better results than if they just dilly-dally like 4 or 5 workouts a week.
Yeah.
So how do you measure, for you, how did you measure intensity then when you suddenly create this minimalist approach? Because a lot of clients, for example, have so many weaknesses in wrists and joints and things like that. What did you do to overcome that skill barrier that's often needs to be overcome with body weight? How did you make that successful?
I had to do a whole scaling process of making the exercises easier. Let's take an exercise that is very difficult for the average person. Let's talk about the pull up or the chin up. Either one, where you're lifting your body weight off the floor, using the strength of your arms and upper back. Most people cannot do that. We take it for granted, because we're in the business. But if we were to go all over the United States and all over Britain we would find that the vast majority of people cannot pull their own weight up over a horizontal bar. So what to do? It's not like you have a nice posh lat machine or something, right? So I found that doing leg assisted chin-ups worked out very well, where people would use their legs to help using suspension straps. And then soon that became too easy. So then I figured, well, what if we were to just support the leg, but not use the leg? So that would be the second step, leg supported chin-ups. Then the third step might be they've built to the point where maybe they can do one, but that's all. One is just all out. So you do a rest pause where you pull yourself up and then you rest, recuperate a little bit, and another one. And eventually you cut the time down between each rep to where they're doing a standard set. And then if they have a lot of potential and they're pretty strong, then you have to make it even harder for the really strong person. Usually you never get to that point, a straight set, but you might start to play with the range of motion, like easier range versus harder range, like that. That was the progression they came up with. Like it's just leg supported, maybe negative emphasized for some people, but I mean that's just one example. So that even my grandmother could get a pull-up workout. I've actually have an 83-year-old woman that I'm working with now who does leg-assisted pull-ups and chin-ups. And then for people that absolutely have serious arthritic problems and joint problems, you can always swap out isometrics for an exercise where dynamic movement is too painful or problematic for the joints. So there's always a way. And as far as intensity, I encourage people to go to momentary muscular failure or momentary muscular fatigue. I think that's the only way you can really tell whether you've actually produced a bona fide training effect. We know that you don't need to go to momentary muscular failure. Science has shown that it's not necessary. But how do you know if you produced a training effect? You don't. But if you fatigue the muscle so thoroughly you cannot do another repetition in good form, then for sure you know that you've done everything you can to produce that training effect. And the whole training to failure thing kind of got a bad rap there for a while, Pavel and all the guys. But see, they made the mistake of thinking and using the old Soviet weightlifting method. Everything's geared towards the 1980s Soviet weightlifting techniques. That's drag and door, and then later strong first. And Pavel even talks about it in his on the forum. But Soviet weightlifting method is not necessarily a good way to train for jiu-jitsu. It's not necessarily a good way to train for a 10K race. It's not necessarily a good way to train for life. It's good for if you want to be a weightlifter. And if lifting a heavy weight is important, that's the way to go. And there you wouldn't want to go to failure because you got to practice the lift as a skill. So there's a lot of confusion between weightlifting and weight training, or strength training versus weightlifting. Modern science has shown us that a heavy weight isn't even necessary if you know how to use it properly.
So would you say one of your principles was specificity? I can't even say it now.
Specificity.
Yeah.
Specificity.
Yeah.
That's one.
So you say it for me, James.
Specificity.
That's the one.
Yeah. You're only good at what you do, basically. You're only good at what you train for.
And have you found, Steve, that you've obviously, how many decades have you been sort of training seriously now? Five decades, something like that?
Well, I started in 1964. Let's count.
Okay.
Wow.
And you're obviously still, in incredible shape now, but you've trained consistently, since the 1960s. So have you found that as time has gone on, have you adapted the way that you personally train, or because you train so consistently and have done for so long, you can you know, obviously maybe you're not the same as you were in your 20s and 30s, but are you able to almost replicate what you've been doing through the whole of your life and career at the moment?
Well, I've changed a lot of things. You know, I started out with the old York barbell system. York, Pennsylvania was the mecca of weight training knowledge back in the 50s and 60s. And some of those old York courses are actually pretty good. And then I did a lot of the, you know, the training schemes of the day. For example, maybe you heard of a fellow by the name of Reg Park from South Africa, very famous strongman bodybuilder. And Reg was the one that invented the 5x5 system. And then perhaps you heard of the 20 rep squat program. You know, these were some things I did as a young man coming up. And I had very good results from those type of training protocols. That's just two that come up, but there's other ones too. And I got very intrigued by a guy by the name of Stuart McRoberts, who wrote The Hard Gainer. I wasn't necessarily a hard gainer. And all the while I was competing in wrestling and then later judo and jiu-jitsu. So I was always looking for ways to improve myself in those sports. So the weight training always had a reason for being. I wasn't weightlifting or weight training for itself or for its own sake. Although, you know, like a lot of young guys, I had an ego and I like to show off big lifts and so forth, you know, but for the most part, my primary purpose was conditioning myself to play my sport better and safer. And then right about 1970, I read about Arthur Jones and the new high intensity training principles. And I got really intrigued. And around 72, I got to a Nautilus gym and tried out these newfangled machines, fell in love with them, and stayed with that for the next couple of decades. Pretty much high intensity training protocols. But then, like a lot of things, started getting bored, started looking at other things. That's when I got on board with the kettlebell and club bells right about the same time, looking at that. But in retrospect, I see that as a mistake now. I think the kettlebells were a mistake. I think they're very hard in the joints. And I think that they can cause a lot of osteoarthritis. And I found that I was damaging myself. And it's really funny because my ex-wife, DC Maxwell, she was the third woman in America to get a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And she was on the cover of Pavel's first women's kettlebell book, From Russia with Tough Love. Maybe you remember that book. She was the pretty blonde on there. But she had said to me very early, she said, hey, you know what? Wouldn't it be a kick in the pants if 10 years from now, we find out that this stuff is really bad for us? And I said, shut up. You know, I don't want to hear it. Sure enough, she's had to have a hip replacement surgery.
And what do you put that down to? Is it a specific sort of exercise or specific sort of protocols that you were using?
It's the wear and tear. Doing fast, high velocity, explosive movements. There's a myth in the exercise community that selectively recruits fast twitch muscle fiber. That is not true. That's patently false. If you look at the literature and you study it closely, you recruit all the muscle fiber, including the fast twitch muscle fiber, just doing an isometric, not even moving. You do not need to move fast to be fast. You do not need to do exploding, clapping push-ups to improve your punch. Moving a heavy weight fast is a very specific skill. You know, we were talking about specificity. It does not enhance other skills. Trying to duplicate sports skills in the weight room is a big mistake. And what I found was the explosive swings and the snatches and the cleans were particularly damaging to the body. And I could name a whole litany of popular trainers that have completely damaged their body from doing this type of lifting and so forth. And it's a mistake. You know, the hip replacements, the knee surgeries, the back surgeries and all that has all been a result of this type of damaging lifting. And I was a big proponent for a while because it's fun and I did enjoy it. But I also realized that it was probably doing more harm than good. And so I almost did a complete reverse and went back to some things I'd worked on earlier, By the way, in the 60s, isometrics were hugely popular. I don't know whether you know, well, you've heard of the great Bruce Lee, big proponent of not only isometrics, but machine training, interesting enough. People always say machines are non-functional. That's silly. A lot of the so-called functional training, like smacking a tire with a sledgehammer, that's the most dysfunctional thing you could do. Why would you do something like that when there's much better, more efficient ways to work the musculature without damaging the body? It's one thing if you have to go out and work all day in a road crew, but why would you voluntarily go and do that? It doesn't make sense. It's a very inefficient way to load the body. No one muscle group is really getting an effective load. And at the end of the day, what have you really done other than just make yourself tired?
So
I've read. Oh, sorry. Go on, Paul.
I was about to say, because this is really interesting to hear, but it puts you in opposition with a vast swathe of strength and conditioning coaches and other people in the same industry, and obviously people that you work with and stuff like that. So where do you see the role of the kind of the tools, the kettlebell, the barbell, the whatever you're going to be using? What is that role? Is that do you see that as a sport, or do you see it as a tool for fitness?
It's more of a sport. Kettlebells for sure. It's kettlebell sport and so forth. It's interesting because besides jiu-jitsu, I also am certified to teach Russian Sistema, which is a Russian military martial art. And I traveled to Russia 8 times. Ironically, kettlebells were not very popular at all. It's just like this strange fringe. We were all lied to. It's not a Russian secret weapon at all. I was to a Russian military academy in Krasnodar, training in Kalashnikov Sistema. And it was like 2 rusty kettlebells over in the corner, and the guys were doing curls with them.
And that was an interesting thing because you see mad things on YouTube with that. So I never.
There are Russians that are training with kettlebells, but it's not like hugely. But for my way of thinking now, I don't see any real reason to use kettlebells at all. To tell the God's honest truth, I really don't, and I'll never use them again. And I can tell you the injuries that people have sustained. Pavel's had both elbows surgery. He was on the Joe Rogan show, and Joe says, "Well, why do you only advocate 2 exercises? If you notice, his last couple books only advocate 2. That's because that's all he can do. Can't do anything else because his elbows are all fucked up." Dan John, I respect a lot. He's an interesting guy, but he's had double hip replacement surgery.
Yeah, he has. Yeah.
The CEO of Strong First, Brett Jones, has had 9 knee surgeries. It's almost like he was bragging about it. I mean, I can go on and on with the back surgeries and knee surgeries and so forth. My ex-wife, DC Maxwell, hip replacement surgery. So far, thank God, I don't have any hip surgery. But I'm loath to take advice from a guy that's had joint replacement surgery. I'm not going to take strength and fitness advice from a guy like that. Now, I'm involved in a very dangerous sport myself.
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu. Some people would question my sanity. Like I say, I'm 68 years old, and I still like to go out there in the mat and roll around. I'm very careful, but still, there's always that element of danger. But see, that's the difference between strength training versus recreation. A lot of people blur the lines. There's a big difference between exercise versus recreation. I look at all these activities as recreational, and you got to pick and choose your recreation careful. For example, running, swimming, triathloning, bicycling, skiing. These are not exercises. These are recreational pursuits. Kayaking, all that stuff, jiu-jitsu, and we need recreation. We do. But we shouldn't try to make our strength training into a recreation. And that's what kettlebells were for a lot of people.
So what do you advocate in so this boils down to exactly what you're teaching your students at the moment. What exactly are you advocating to help them reach their goals, which is often they probably come to you do they come to you as a strength coach, or what do they come to you as?
Usually fat loss.
Okay.
A lot of, I mean, the United States is leading the world in obesity. It's pretty sad. And the rest of Europe is quickly catching up, unfortunately. I'm sure you see it in the UK, you know,
Mhm.
the obesity epidemic. So a lot of people are really struggling to maintain weight and weight control and so forth. But what I maintain, what I now, it's not, once again, it's not so much the equipment, but it's the way you train. I'm very into high tension, slow, controlled repetition over full range. And it doesn't matter whether you use your body weight. And for a lot of people, they've damaged themselves so much over the years that I put them in an isometric program.
Okay.
And a lot of people that were stuck at home, they didn't really have much in the way of equipment. So that exercise philosophy lends itself really well to minimalist approach to exercise. So even if you don't have any equipment at all, you know, you can still give yourself a great workout in your own living room, just using isometrics and bodyweight exercise, done slow, controlled.
So would you say the if someone comes to you and say they're just the average person, really what you're doing is you're just trying to create the most resilient, healthy individual. So someone who has good joint range of motion, someone who has resilient, tough musculature, someone who has good posture, someone who has some kind of endurance and some kind of strength. But it's human specific, but not necessarily recreational sports specific strength.
That's correct. There was a fellow by the name of Ken Hutchins that wrote a very important paper called Recreation versus Exercise. And it was probably one of the most important papers ever written because, once again, there's this huge blurring of the lines. You know, for example, CrossFit, very popular, right? CrossFit is not exercise, it's recreation. It's a recreational sport. People compete in exercise. I almost hate to say this, but my daughter is very good CrossFit. She's incredibly strong. She's probably stronger than I am now, man. I mean, she's lifting some amazing weights, and you know, she does the CrossFit work, and she loves it. That's her sport. That's her recreation. That's what she does. And we've had many conversations about this. And you know, I've tried to warn her about, you know, some of the joint things to come because she's doing some very questionable type things, you know, with her body. But yeah, there's a distinct difference between recreation versus exercise. But go to seriousexercise.com and you can download the recreation versus exercise paper and read it for yourself. It's really quite good.
So if someone's here's one of the interesting things for our listeners who are generally not trainers. So one of the things they're going to be hearing is like, well, all I have access to are strength and conditioning coaches or CrossFits or, you know, PTs. Does that mean I'm going down the wrong route? So what advice would you give to someone who would be working with a more traditional strength and conditioning approach? What kind of principles could they apply to their process, given that they're probably not training with someone like yourself? What would be their route to maintain that joint health, etc.?
Well, probably the most important thing anyone can do is just slow down. Once again, exercise science has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, it's not the amount of mechanical work being performed. The amount of repetitions don't matter. It's the time under load that matters. 3 10-second reps would be absolutely as valuable as doing 20 faster reps. For example, I was at a fairly well-known gym in London. It was called the Commando Temple.
Yeah.
There was a young man in there that was really showing off. He had quite a nice physique. And of course, he had his shirt off, so everyone knew it. And he jumped up on the pull-up bar and he knocked out 21 pull-ups pretty fast, about 1 second up, 1 second down. But that's impressive, you know. I mean, 21 pull-ups, no matter how you do it, unless, of course, you're kipping. He didn't kip, but it was close. You know, 1 second up, 1 second down. But for the 20 reps he did, there was about 40-second time under load. So I instructed my client to get up because I was giving a PT session. And he did 4 seconds up, 1 second pause, 4 seconds down, taking care not to yank the joints. and his elbows in his shoulders, keeping the elbows and shoulders in the socket. And he ended up doing five reps, but each one was over 10 seconds. He actually had a greater time under load. He had close to a minute time under load versus the 40 seconds of the guy that did the 20 reps. Now, both styles of training will give you the same results. You still get the same hypertrophy and the same strength, whether you go slow, whether you go fast, but the slower is way safer and a lot less traumatic to the joints. For that young fella that trained in that explosive fashion, he's creating micro trauma every single time he trains. Little insults to the body. He won't notice it for a while. It's like smoking, you know? I've known people that smoke for decades and they seem fine. And then one day they're diagnosed with emphysema or cancer. Well, it's the same thing with this type of training. You don't feel it. You feel pretty good. You know, you get all this feel-good hormones and so forth. You're all janked up, you know, all fired up. But over time, you notice, man, my shoulders really bugging me. God, my back's so stiff. You get out of bed. Over time, the joint health begins to erode from all these micro traumas, micro insults. Not an acute injury, subacute injury. And that's why I have people slow down, to prevent these subacute injuries. There's no reason to go faster unless you want to lift more weight or you want to do more reps. But we know that mechanical work doesn't matter. And a clever fella can use a relatively light weight, even just body weight, and make it really, really hard. Because at the end of the day, all that matters is creating a deep level muscular fatigue. And that's what taps into the survival mechanism. Your body is saying, whoa, this task I've been given has produced this deep level fatigue. And I wasn't up to the task. So I better take my valuable bodily resources and go towards making myself a little bit stronger. It's part of the survival mechanism. So each workout is basically tapping into your biologic survival mechanism. And it has nothing to do with the amount of weight or reps or anything else.
I think that's absolutely fantastic, Steve, because I think a lot of, I mean, there's always this thing around gyms and things anyway, isn't there, about specifically men really trying to lift more weight, more load than they can safely to tap into this ego type thing. And so that's one of the first things is, you know, to lift what you can lift safely, but then to actually slow it right down as well, which means you're going to have to deal with less load, aren't you, to do the exercise correctly and safely, and it will make it a lot harder. So it totally strips away that ego and sounds like a really safe and we talk a lot on this show about longevity, you know, and we train people in their 50s, 60s, 70s. So that's a great piece of advice, I think, for everyone.
Well, it's a bit like the we spoke to Brad Kearns a few weeks. I don't know if you know Brad. He's part of he works with Mark Sisson. So he's part of the kind of paleo community, but he was an endurance athlete and he utilizes a system called the 180 formula from Phil Maffetone. And really what that does is it just gives you some direct feedback on what your heart is telling you, which is go slower, or I'm strong enough for you to go fast. And it gives you that feedback. And you can do that with a heart rate monitor. You can strap it on your wrist and it will beep when you hit a certain zone, you know, and for the 180, it's 180 minus your age. But when it comes to the variety of human movement, squats, deadlifts, push-ups, pull-ups, isometrics, handstands, you name it, they all seem to have a different level of intensity. And to try and learn that is very complex for people. And I suppose what we try and do and what we're trying to do on this podcast is it goes back to what you said earlier, which is the principles. So have you ever done any thinking around sticking the principles into some kind of easy to consume manner for your clients, or do they just pick it up on the fly?
Well, I mean, there's things out there already that outline the principles very well. Like I said, the book Body by Science, excellent resource for people that want to get started. Ken Hutchins wrote a lot of different manuals and so forth. But I guess if you would do the exact opposite of what most people do in the gym, you'd probably be on the right track. They explode and go really fast, and you should slow down. The people walk around, for long periods of rest between sets so they can lift more weight. You'd be better off going from exercise to exercise with very little rest. By the way, there's a lot of exciting research on strength training's role in building heart health. Up to now, heart health has always been considered the domain of aerobic steady state exercise. But with the new research, they showed that strength training equally strengthens the heart, not with elevated heart rate. That's not necessarily an indicator of whether your heart is getting a workout. Cardio perfusion is greatly increased during strength training because of a superior venous return. So with strength training, you're getting a more efficient venous return. So the heart doesn't have to pump as fast, but it's pumping harder. So each beat, the ejection fraction, the amount of or stroke volume, the blood being pushed out of the heart is much greater per beat. So there is definitely heart-friendly, heart-healthy benefits to strength training. And if you pretty much go from exercise to exercise with little or no rest, you are getting quite a good cardiovascular and cardiorespiratory workout as well. So for a lot of my people, they don't have time to do much more than maybe walk during the day. And I can assure them that they're getting plenty of cardio benefit just from doing the slow, high intensity strength training. They don't need two separate workouts per se.
We talk about that a lot on here, actually. And saying to people, if you're going to the gym to burn calories by doing as many, like by running on the treadmill as far and fast as you can, or going on the rowing machine for however long, just to burn calories and get the cardio, just go for a walk instead, outside in the fresh air, and get some vitamin D and do some strength training instead, and you'll still get the cardio benefit.
That's right.
Doing
cardio for calorie burning is pretty much an exercise in futility. You burn really a very small amount of calories, you do not raise the metabolism. That's another myth.
No. You're burning calories for 4 days afterwards and all of that. It's like, oh, come on.
No. Maybe an hour.
Question: you were talking about high intensity training that you were doing in the 70s.
Yeah.
So so this brings me up, because a lot of people will do high intensity training now because they go down the gym and they get the afterburn effect that they talk about and all of that, don't they? By doing all these exercises as fast as possible. So you've just said you can do exercise after exercise after exercise with minimal rest.
Sorry, someone just came in.
You can do, I was like, am I hearing things? You can do exercise after exercise with minimal rest, and you get the cardio benefit. But for people listening, that might mean, well, going to a HIIT class where you're doing, loud music and bang, 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 do this and then do this and do that. Yeah. But
there's two types of HIIT. There's HIIT, high intensity interval training. This is something I wouldn't recommend. There's no reason to do it. There's no doubt that it works, but there's no doubt that it also erodes joint health over time. The type of high intensity training I'm talking about is HIIT or HIIT, high intensity training. And for someone that is very much
for listeners,
well, the high intensity training is strength training, only strength training, and it's done in a controlled scientific manner. No fast jerky movements. The weight and repetitions are not the primary goal; they're only secondary goals. The primary goal of the training is muscular fatigue, producing deep level muscular fatigue. And so, for example, in a let's say a CrossFit class or weightlifting, I'm doing everything in my power to make the exercise easier because I want to lift more weight, right? Or I want to do more reps. So I'm doing everything in my power to make the exercise more efficient and easier. Whereas with the type of philosophy I'm talking about, I'm doing everything in my power to make it harder, Rather than looking for ways to make it easier, I'm looking for ways to make it much, much harder. That's why you don't need a real heavy weight.
So there's
Now,
things
if you want to lift a heavy weight, you got to practice heavy weight.
well, if you look back in the 19th century, you've got Eugene Sandow and Arthur Saxon talking about the light dumbbell system, where they used isometrics and very light weights. They used maybe 3-pound weights and would do very high repetitions back to back with minimal rest. And they would never go heavier than, say, like 5 kilos in total, which so that the old masters had a very similar thinking, if I'm correct.
Well, unfortunately, they almost went too far the other way with the super light dumbbells and so forth. I'm not talking about that so much. This is more like middle of the road.
Right.
You know, you gotta use a weight that's heavy enough to tax your muscles and create fatigue. Somewhere between 30 seconds and a minute and 120 seconds. So, in other words, if the weight's so heavy you can't get at least 30 seconds time under load, then you need to lighten it up. And once you're doing like 120 seconds or 2 minutes, the weight's way too light. And most people do better somewhere between 60 and 90 seconds. And your tolerance for time under load, that's something you almost have to experiment with. Some people do better with a shorter time under load. Some people do better with a higher time under load. And I want to be very clear, because there's going to be some people who got their feelings hurt from some of the things I said. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm not saying it doesn't work. All these systems out there are working. The gymnastic systems are working. The in the hood systems are working. The kettlebells for sure work. There's no doubt about it. Powerlifting works. CrossFit works. Olympic lifting works. It all works. But they're not all equally efficient in the time. They're not all equally safe. Everyone always talks about hypertrophy. Everyone always talks about strength. But everyone's leaving out safety. You almost never hear guys, because they're in their most instructors in their 20s and 30s, some in their 40s. But usually guys, by the time they reach my age, they're definitely thinking safety, because I can see the error of my ways. I can see, wow, probably wasn't such a great idea that I did that, And at the end of the day, just because someone gets a certain result training a particular way, doesn't mean they couldn't have got the same or even better results training a different way, and safer results training a different way. So, there's a lot of people that have been ruined by their success. They have initial success with a particular system, and they just stick with it come hell or high water, even to their own detriment.
Can I ask you, Steve, about, because obviously you said a lot of clients will come to you with, like for most of us, I think, with say fat loss goals and things like that. And what do you do? I know we haven't really talked about it today, but you have we've mentioned it, but you have this sort of minimalist approach to kind of life in general, and not just training, but this sort of non-attachment to things, and, keeping material things very, very, very low and that sort of thing. What do you do in terms of, or what would you advise, and what do you do yourself in terms of diet and eating? I'd imagine you keep things very simple in that respect as well, do you?
I do. There's like this huge idea that you need to gouge yourself with protein. It's simply not true. And, carbohydrate became the bad boy of nutrition. It's funny, because when I was coming up in the 60s and 70s, fat was the bad boy of nutrition. Then it kind of turned, and now, the carbohydrate. Carbohydrates are protein sparing. So if you have a diet rich in carbohydrate, your protein is spared to do exactly what it needs: growth and repair. I follow the advice of Dr. John Tilden, who was a turn of the century American physician who treated disease through natural means. And it's really funny, because he really railed against the overuse of drugs and vaccines and all this kind of stuff. And this was more than 100 years ago. And but he thought it was going to get better, but I can see it's just gotten much, much worse. And he was very much into improving digestion. Just because you eat it doesn't mean you can digest it. And if you overload your body with what he called crowded nutrition, it makes the digestion very inefficient. So there's a real tendency to overeat in situations like that because this food isn't digested and it's not giving the satiety levels and it's not providing people with the nutrients they need. So basically, it's a simplified meal plan. For example, I'll usually have 3 meals a day. One's a fruit-based meal when fruit's in season. One's a protein-based meal, and I couple that with a large raw vegetable salad. And then there's a carbohydrate-rich meal or a starch-rich meal. And that could also be had with vegetables. And you can intersperse. You can have the protein in the morning or the fruit at night or whatever. And oftentimes I'll even just eat 2 meals a day. 2 meals a day.
And so you're just you're just eating to hunger. So if you're really hungry, you'll just eat more on the plate. If you're feeling
just pretty on the plate.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when you start to combine the foods and make the food make the meals very simple, your digestion improves a lot. You really, really get a very efficient digestion. And you'll find yourself just eating less and less. You just don't really need to eat that much.
And I know it hasn't affected your training or anything like that, or your clients' training. You just find
no, not at all. Many people, to tell the truth, the first thing I get people to do is stop drinking. I have this one woman I'm working with, just not drinking for 2 weeks, she lost almost 4 kilos. That's the only thing she changed.
Yeah.
Alcohol really shuts down your fat burning mechanism, makes it very hard to lose fat. Even one beer or one glass of wine will make it almost impossible for your body to access its own stored fat. A lot of people don't even know what happens to fat. Your fat is metabolized and breathed out your lungs as CO2, converted to carbon dioxide. That was something that was just kind of like a recent finding. And going out and jumping around and running marathons, all this stuff, it's not really going to help. It's just going to increase your appetite, make you really ravenously hungry. So other than walking, I don't advocate people do a lot of running and all this kind of stuff. Now, if people like it, if they enjoy it, do it as a recreational pursuit. But don't think you have to do it for health or longevity or anything like that. And I mean, if you look at the oldest people in the world, in the blue zones, they're not running marathons. They're not doing all this crazy stuff. Most of them are doing pretty moderate activity most of the day. But all of them could benefit from doing some strength training.
I was just going to say, Steve, that's really interesting because a lot of the things that if you're having a meal that's predominantly fruit and you're having a meal that's maybe, I think you said protein with like a raw vegetable salad or something, most of the food that you're eating is in its natural state, isn't it? Or very, very near to its natural state without demanding much preparation and much cooking and all that sort of thing. So it's the preparation time for these things is very low as well. And you're really getting maximum sort of nutrition and convenience from that food. And it also tastes a lot better in its natural state as well.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. Yesterday for breakfast, I had Laird's coffee. It has MCT. It's just a simple Arabic coffee, organic, and it's probably about 150 calories. And then I took 2 tablespoons of lipo-C, which is a very, very good for the immune system. It's about 90 calories per tablespoon. I had 2 tablespoons. So that's a meal. It's a light meal, but it's a meal. And then I went out and I went to the local jiu-jitsu school and I rolled with one of the young guys there for almost an hour. And I can still put a whooping on these young boys. And then I came back and I had lamb. And I had that with a large raw vegetable salad and some steamed broccoli. And, you know, it's about 5 hours between each feeding. And then later last night, about 5 o'clock, I had a bowl of quinoa with a few pine nuts in there. And I sweetened it up with a little date sugar. Just, you know, just a little, give it a little sweet taste. And it was delicious. That was it. That was the meal for the day. And besides doing the jiu-jitsu yesterday, I also went out and walked about 3 miles at a nice pace, doing systemic breathing exercises, some breath holding drills. And of course, every day I do mobility drills. I've just recently got into cane fighting, you know, using a walking stick, you know, like Sherlock Holmes. So I take my cane out and I practice.
I saw a photo of you walking out of the door, I think, with a walking stick, and I didn't know what it was about. You know,
Do you ever do a Willy Wonka? You know, when he walks out with his walking stick, Gene Wilder, and then have you seen that film? And then like it sticks, and he's like, "Oh no!" And like someone like you could look like you might need a stick, but then you're like, "Actually, I can move." Look,
that's funny. But an interesting note about the cane, by the way. TSA, the security people cannot take your cane when you fly because it's a medical instrument. So whereas you can never fly with any kind of other weapon, certainly no bladed, no, you know, anything like that, you know, stun gun or, you know, pepper spray, any kind of firearm or knife or bladed instrument. But a walking stick is perfectly legal because it's a medical instrument. As long as it doesn't have metal on it. If it's wood, you're good.
So no sword in it then?
No sword.
That's all academic anyway, because you can't fly anywhere at the minute, can you? So
yeah, well, in the States, you know, I flew to South Carolina and stayed there for a couple months. And some states are more open than others. Some states don't even mandate masks.
Yeah, well, we're coming out of our kind of restrictions. We're in the process of easing. So gyms are starting to open. People are starting to mix a little bit more. So, you know, we'll see how the world looks in a few months. But one of the things I wanted to bring up, and I'm aware of time because we don't want to keep you all day because you've got things to do. But my wife broke her arm a year ago, just around about here. So just at the top of the arm. And it's quite a bad break. So lots of pins and everything. But I'd listened to you on Joe Rogan, actually, and you talked about hanging as a form of therapy. And you know what? She had pretty crazy results of just hanging. Because one of the things that she's got great posture. She used to do a lot of ballet when she was a kid. So she's always had really good posture and a good movement in her arms and her shoulders, sorry. But she was fearful that she was going to lose it. And actually hanging, both in pronated and supinated position, seemed to just have a radical effect on her healing and the increase in mobility. And it's certainly something that I'm always telling my clients about. So where did you hear about that system?
There was a fellow by the name of Dr. John Kirsch. He wrote a book called Shoulder Pain, Its Solution and Prevention. He was an orthopedic surgeon, and you know, surgeons make their living operating on people. So if you go to an orthopedic man for advice about an injury, of course he's going to immediately say surgery. You know, that's what the medical community does. They either can operate on you with surgery or give you drugs, but there's no preventative anything. You know, they don't have any answers to prevention or holistic health. But Kirsch started to experiment. I'm not sure exactly how he first came up with the idea, but he started getting people to hang by their hands as a rehabilitation tool. And he found that the brachial hang, the overhand hang, palms facing away, hand shoulder width, actually worked better for getting rid of shoulder pain than the surgery. A lot of his surgical patients would come back with complications later. And he got to the point where he was having such success, he refused to do shoulder surgery anymore. That was it. He wouldn't do it. And he just started putting everyone on hanging programs. And he did a landmark study at a retirement home with elders in their 80s in Kauai. Kauai is one of the Hawaiian islands. There's like Hawaii, Oahu, Kauai, Lanai. It's one of the main chains, and with stellar results. And after reading his book, I started hanging. And I have a little bar right here in my tiny house that I put up on my sleeping loft, and I hang every day. And I've had many of my athletes and online personal training people that I coach start to hang as part of the daily regimen. And it really has profound effect. And just like your wife found out, it really works amazingly well. It's quite painful if you have certain shoulder ailments, but eventually that pain goes away to the point where you have pain-free range of motion.
And again, it's about scaling it, isn't it? It's not about jumping on there and hanging up for as long as you can. It's about just chipping away.
Some people I have, they keep their feet on the floor. I lower the bar down, or we use 2 straps, and they only do partially weighted hangs in the beginning. And over time, they build up more and more and more and more. So eventually, the shoulder socket just opens right up. It creates room in the shoulder socket for the humerus to move around, the coracoid bone. And in the book, Shoulder Pain is Solution and Prevention. You can buy it on Amazon and read it off your iPhone. It's a very easy read. It's not too scientific, but he shows X-ray after X-ray, MRI after MRI, pictures in the book, evidence of how well the hanging works for getting rid of shoulder problems. And if you hang prophylactically as a preventative, you'll never have shoulder problems for the most part, unless, you would fall off your mountain bike or something. But I mean, for the most part, if you just hang as a preventative treatment, just at the end of each workout, and hanging by your hands is an awesome grip workout too. Amazing grip workout. If the average person can work up to 2 minutes, they have an incredibly strong grip. And there's a very high correlation between longevity and grip strength, by the way.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I love getting people to do hanging, because you say, right, how long, you ask them first, how long do you think you'll be able to hang off there for? And they go, I don't know, like a minute or so? Maybe, is that too, is that long enough? And then they hang for about 15 seconds and they start to slip off the bar, and they're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And it's like, exactly, it's a big deal.
Yeah. So hanging, I used as like one of my featured exercises in every routine,
And so you have this body weight certification at the moment, don't you?
I do. I created it. People were stuck at home, no way to work out. I really do like isometrics, but many people find isometrics quite boring, or they just want something else to do along with isometrics. And I must admit, isometrics are not very sexy, but they do work. But people do like to people like to move. Psychologically, people like to move, but they got to move in a way that is safe. And the vast majority of people out there, especially in the States, are quite overweight, and their body weight is just too heavy. They can't do a proper press up. They have no chance of doing a pull up or a chin up. Just no way. For a lot of people, they're so immobile, they can't do a body weight squat properly without coming on their toes or leaning their torso forward, or they just simply can't get down. So I needed a way to scale the exercises. So I created like an 8-step way that you could take your mother or your grandmother and train them, or an awkward, teenager who's been playing video games, all his life. And you could take anybody like this, or even to rehabilitate somebody from an accident or post-surgery or whatever. You can, with the program, you can scale these exercises from an absolute weakling beginner to an Olympic caliber athlete. There's a whole range, even within the same exercise, even within press up. You can do elevated press, and then very gradually move the height of the either platform or, I like to use a bar and a power rack, but it could be pieces of furniture. Maybe you're doing it on the dining room table, and then maybe the next time, you get strong enough, you use in the living room couch or whatever, over time, over weeks and months. to eventually do press ups on the floor?
Well, I've spent the last year running my business online and offering classes through Zoom. And sometimes people just have no equipment. You know, if you're lucky, people have got like a bag of rice or a bottle of water, or someone's got a small kettlebell or something. So everything has been body weight. But one of the big limits I noticed at the beginning was people's joints, which I don't get as much, feet. I don't get as much kind of ailments coming, into classes, because people's wrists have started to condition. They've worked on those early progressions. They've managed to push themselves without injury, and they keep showing up week after week after week. And it's been a great leveler, actually, because it's been very creative for me as a trainer, because I started doing the Zoom classes thinking, this is not what I'm into. This is not why I'm doing training. And I was quite annoyed because it interrupted everything, this pandemic. But by the end of it, I've come to really, really enjoy it. And I enjoy the process of coming up with classes now, and how I can be inventive with clients and seeing their kind of skill levels just slowly and incrementally increase.
Yeah, I find the same. I was quite intimidated by Zoom and the whole internet thing. I mean, I was always doing online training, but mostly through emails, But I mean, how much can you really do through email? I did produce good results, but still, it's nothing like watching and seeing or being able to demonstrate. So Zoom has been a revolution for me. And I think a lot of people are not going to go back to the gym. I think Zoom is here to stay. I really do. And I think these online classes are probably the wave of the future. People really like being able to work in the privacy of their own living rooms and their own bedrooms and their own homes.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
Steve,
it's going to stick for me.
And Steve, where do people go to access the bodyweight course that you've got, that they can access that and buy that now? Where would they go for that?
I think did Teresa send you the links for this? I think.
Yeah, yes, she did actually. I've got those.
Yeah, just shoot them over to me, Paul.
Yeah, we'll put the links for that into the show notes and things, so people can access and click straight through to the bodyweight course. That sounds fantastic. That sounds really, really great.
It enables the trainer to take almost any level. And I mean, I can remember before I came up with these progressions, and I didn't invent it. I mean, there's a fellow by the name of Drew Bay that came up with a lot of these ideas. I just kind of expanded on some of his stuff. But I was always frustrated because, I mean, trying to get a person to do a proper press up is not an easy thing if they haven't been training for a long time. I mean, collapsed neck, collapsed lower back, shoulder blades, sticking way out. It's just really hard. But, these progressions make it much easier for the professional trainer, or just even the layperson that just wants to find a way that they can exercise themselves in a safe way.
I think that's a brilliant place to maybe end this on, because I think that encapsulates everything that the podcast is about, which is like that you can do this safely, you can do this sustainably, and we all want to be having these conversations when we're in our 60s, 70s, and 80s beyond, that we can still train, we still perform, and be aware of the mileage that we've acquired over the years, but have a way of being the best we can at any point. Because a lot of people get in touch with us saying, I want to be the best I can at this age or this age or this age. And I think what you show quite clearly is there is a roadmap to it. You've just got to educate yourself. And I get a sense that education is at the forefront of what you teach.
Well, one of my early mentors said something, and we can end on this. He said, look, anyone can be something really amazing at 20, 30, or even their 40s, anyone can. But you don't see too many people that are amazing at 70 or 80 or 90. I'd like to be that latter group. I'd like to be that person in his 80s and 90s that is still pretty amazing. And so I had that long range goal, I'm looking at the big picture, I'm playing the long game. A lot of these YouTube wonders are going to be completely burnt out by the time they're in their 40s, late 40s. They're going to find out everything I'm saying is true. It's hard though when you're young and you're full of piss and vinegar, and and your
dad's always like, he tells you, and you're like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. I know what I'm talking. And then you get to hit your dad's age, and you're like, Oh, he was right.
Yeah, he was right, man. My father served in World War II in the U.S. Navy, and I was watching this television show called The Pacific. Maybe you've heard of it. It's a 10-part miniseries about the U.S. Marine Corps in the Battle of Guadalcanal. Well,
Yes.
my father's part of that naval operation, and it was pretty bad. I mean, the Japanese took a huge toll on the U.S. in those battles. I mean, both sides, just horrific casualties. But he was there, and I was thinking, my God, these people were tough back then. I mean, I can't even imagine, going onto like a beach and just having machine gun, like Normandy, like Saving Private Ryan. I mean, you look at these guys and you think, wow, that was some really, really tough people back in the day, man. I don't know what's happened in this modern age, but we're sure not like that generation, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. And I think you're well on your way to certainly being incredible in your, 80s and 90s. So yeah, that's it's a great.
Well, that's why we got you on, because we just think the stuff you do, just, you wouldn't be here doing it now if it hadn't worked.
Yeah, well, for sure. And, there's a learning process in there too. And, at every step of the way, the stuff would work, but some with more risk than others, So I'm not saying this stuff doesn't work, but just because it works doesn't mean it's the best.
And you've managed to achieve it while someone's tried to wrestle you to the ground and break your arm. Yeah, which doesn't happen to me in my general life.
In fact, I have to shove off. I have a young guy waiting to break my arm right now. So,
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Steve. It was an absolute pleasure to meet you and to speak to you today.
Good talking to you guys too. Thanks for having me on the show, and hopefully we'll see each other again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers, Steve.
Have a good day now. Cheers.
So that about wraps up the show. Thanks to everyone for listening. We've been Health Oddity. My name's Paul. I'm with Peter and James. Is there anything you want to say, guys?
Just that was quite incredible, wasn't it? It kind of, he said a lot of things there that give a lot of people, so all of us probably something to think about. And I've got a big list of references as well that he kind of said, books and studies and things that he was referencing there. So yeah, it was quite incredible to spend the hour with him. So yeah, very, very good.
Yeah, and from me, I mean, yeah, I'm gonna have to listen to that again and go back through. I've written down a load of stuff, but it's very random. But just to build on what Steve said right at the end there, or near the end, was he wants to be that guy in his 80s and 90s, and I want to be that as well. But when people look at that and you say, like, right, they might look at Steve and say, like, how do you do that? How are you like that now? And it's because he started in 1964.
Yeah.
Right? And I
It's
mean, we're all in our mid-40s now, even though I don't look like it because I've had my hair cut.
41.
All right, well, I'm in my mid-40s.
42.
I know, but I'm in my mid-40s. I started training late in my 30s, and I was out of shape, and I had knackered joints and everything. I started training late in my 30s, so it's not too late. The best time to start was way back when, but the second best time to start is now. So, if you're in your 40s, 50s, whatever, if you're in your 50s, in 20 years' time, you'll be in your 70s. Imagine how good and strong you'd be if you started now. So,
Well, I think this podcast has given us so much to think about. We should do a podcast about this podcast where we actually diagnose it and take it through. Because obviously, as strength trainers, as kettlebell enthusiasts, as barbell enthusiasts, as bodyweight, I love bodyweight stuff. We've been pushed to question things. So
damn right, yeah. Which is why we're here. We said that in the very beginning, didn't we? We want to be challenged.
We want to be challenged. We have been challenged.
Yeah.
But someone who knows what they're talking about as well, which is we should digest and see what we come back with. So anyway, needless to say, this is the Health Oddity. Please like, subscribe, and just share this amongst friends. Loads of interesting talking points here. Who we got on next week? Do we know?
Tim Anderson, I think.
Tim Anderson. Oh, wow.
Tim Anderson from Original
Strength. It's a perfect
Strength.
segue because Tim Anderson of Original Strength is all about that longevity. It's all about listening to your body. So what a great combination, Steve Maxwell, Tim Anderson. It's going to be great. Anyway, thanks a lot, guys, and we shall see you all soon.
You've been listening to Health Odyssey with Peter Lant, Paul Bassett, and James St. Pierre. To get your regular fix of hype-free health, you can subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can find out more on today's and other topics at healthodyssey.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching for Health Odyssey.